I want to make something clear. You saw the video name, obviously we're going to be talking about Xenoblade Chronicles 3 negatively. But the point here is not to say it's bad. It's one of the most accessible titles in the series, with a strong cast and a story that finds a healthy balance between referencing past releases, maintaining the franchise's themes, and creating a new narrative that stands on its own. It's possibly one of the best and most well-rounded games the developer, Monolith Soft, has made. I wanted to lay that out because I'm gonna be nitpicky here, and it's not an attack on its quality. Why I'm underwhelmed has more to do with my expectations of the team behind it. It's been nearly 20 years since I played my first title from the company. The Xeno franchise, Baten Kaitos, Endless Frontier, and the hamburger eating game with earthquakes all together have made them my favorite developer. Excluding the fun motion controller romp that is Disaster Day of Crisis, many of their titles have very similar concepts and values, especially regarding world structure and combat. Themes too, but I don't have a particular interest in the greater Xeno universe and how our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ fits into it. Don't expect any story analysis or spoilers here, but this video will be dense in details, so having knowledge of at least the Xenoblade series is really recommended. We're focusing on Monolith Soft's combat and world structure, and I think their best efforts have common traits. Still, that doesn't mean I want the implementation to be the same in each release. Combat is the most visible part of this. In my eyes, Monolith Soft's battle systems are often defined by creating an environment where the player can't comfortably track and maintain every element. That's not a bad thing. The player is constantly juggling a bunch of mechanics as is, then some wild card is thrown in. These can often be manipulated, but I describe them like an element of luck. Some examples include Xenosaga Episode 1 having a roulette that changes battle conditions each turn, Baten Kaitos literally dropping usable attack cards in your hand mid-action, or in the case of the Xenoblade franchise, AI companions that often dictate when or how combos play out, both of the break, topple, launch variety, and Xenoblade Chronicles 2's elemental combos. The implementation of these systems is usually very different between each title, but to me, the idea is to keep at least one piece out of the player's hand, then have them quickly react when everything lines up. That's not necessarily a hard, fast rule in each one. Some releases have much simpler loops, though I often feel they still maintain some aspects of this. And it's not like other developers don't try this either. I just think Monolith Soft has a particular strength in highlighting this. Things are a little more subdued and complicated to discuss for world structure, especially pre-Xenoblade. We'll keep things simple and focus on the original and the X spin-off since they're at the far ends of that franchise's spectrum. The original game is actually really linear in a lot of ways. Still, it maintains a sense of openness, as there are plenty of opportunities to crisscross between what are essentially defined paths. It constantly pushes the player forward and entices them to move laterally between landmarks, literal paths, or visually distinct land formations. So it gives the feeling of exploring a more expansive area, while not necessarily getting away from what the developers want to highlight. Meanwhile, Xenoblade Chronicles X has a traditional open world, where basically every part of the map is accessible, with well over half of it being available from the start. Both of these descriptions overly simplify each world. There's a lot to be said about how being tiny ants living on a giant dead god affects area design, or how Xenoblade Chronicles X plays with scale and objective layouts, but we're already like 4 minutes into this video. We need to talk about Xenoblade Chronicles 3. My key takeaways here for you is that combat design and at least the Xenoblade franchise's world structure have similar kernels historically. How they manifest in each is usually very different. For me, Xenoblade Chronicles 3 struggles to form an identity because many of its core pieces feel like they come out of previous Xenoblade games and not from these more foundational traits from the developer's history, which could have been very intentional. A key element of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is that the worlds of the first two numbered entries are coming together. This is represented in various story points, aesthetics, and gameplay features. Transformations called Ouroboros have two characters fusing. There are slight changes to combat classes depending on which world they originate from, and a new fusion art system lets players stack attack effects from each world onto each other. This can be somewhat felt in the world structure as well, though it is more evident in area aesthetics, which literally combines landmarks and settings from both titles. I really appreciate this idea on paper, especially regarding combat. Whenever there's a mechanic based on story themes, I'm usually all for it. Shulk not being able to do any damage to humanoid enemies in Xenoblade Chronicles 1? Annoying, sure, but neat. But I don't feel like these pieces combine to make something that feels new or distinct, failing to have any significant impact on how the player engages with the game's mechanics or navigates its world. Instead, it ends up being somewhere between each entry, although it is often heavily weighted in one direction. Combat specifically feels based on the foundation set in Xenoblade Chronicles 2, a game that, while definitely maintains the general concept of the original with the more cooldown-based action RPG style, did a great job setting itself apart with weapon swapping mid-combat, chaining actions into each other, and an elemental combo system where each party member's special attack led to a final blow. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 thankfully doesn't try to replicate these systems, though interacting with them often feels very similar. Chaining actions into each other using a feature known as art canceling is still the predominant moment-to-moment interaction like Xenoblade Chronicles 2. This is where interrupting an action into another gives a damage bonus. The wrinkle here is the previously mentioned fusion arts. They can be combined and used with another art, or simply used on their own, increasing the number of skills the player has access to from 3 to 6. There are considerations on when and how to cancel arts, and whether you use a fusion art to do so, but it doesn't change how it feels to play. The layer on top of this core loop are the Ouroboros. They do a lot of damage, especially when using fusion arts before transforming into them. Those fusion arts build a power meter up for them that can go to a cap of level 3, making them do a lot more damage while also applying some additional debuffs. What is disappointing is that using Ouroboros feels like a more restricted version of the main combat system. Fusion arts aren't available in this form, and Ouroboros don't even initially have art canceling, making them feel slow and cumbersome. Eventually, the latter can be unlocked, but even then, it doesn't provide something new to play with, it's just the core combat with bigger damage numbers and fewer things to do. I think this is a bigger problem with mech implementation in the Xeno franchise as a whole, and unfortunately, this game doesn't escape it. I always kind of begrudgingly use them. The one system I think feels the most different here is this iteration's chain attack. Like in other games, once a meter is built up, the player can freeze combat and select actions from each party member. Their attacks have modifiers, they do different amounts of damage, and they help contribute to the number of attacks that can be activated. Ultimately, this results in a big old giant number blast at the end. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 probably has the most complicated version of the chain attack system, but to keep it simple, there's a percentage meter that fills up with each attack. Hitting 100% activates a special attack for the round. Each time 100% is reached, the combo will continue for up to 3 to 5 rounds. Overflowing the gauge is ideal since it increases the damage dealt and gives more options for combos. It's a great system with lots of strategy for choosing who should act and when. Plus, it can be combined with Ouroboros to get even more out of it. Though ultimately, I keep coming back to how the player interacts with this system is basically the same. Maybe if this was the first iteration after Xenoblade 1, since the chain attack system there is a bit less fleshed out, still, the outer shell of what you're doing feels very similar to the second game, with only really changing the components for decision making. I'm decently happy with this system because it does make you think differently from past titles, though unlike the battle system where I can find pieces to enjoy and respect, it's harder for me to find positive things to say about the world structure. Areas feel similar to Xenoblade Chronicles 1 design regarding pathing elements with distinct lines of attractions that push the player forward. However, it focuses more on wider and less populated environments, giving the little sprinkle of the more truly open environments of Xenoblade Chronicles X. That is something I feel Xenoblade Chronicles 2 tried to do, but ultimately failed before fixing it in the Torna DLC. If you want to know more about that, I talked about it in my review of the expansion. Props to them for successfully implementing this on a larger scale though. But because this approach is kind of in the middle between the extremes of the franchise, I can't really find what this game does best. I think all Xenoblade Chronicles sequels lack in the variety of landscapes that the first one excelled at, and there's no aha moment like Xenoblade Chronicles X, where the player's scale is literally increased to transform the navigation of that world. My bigger question is what defines Xenoblade Chronicles 3's world? Maybe you can point to it being kind of like a big circle, Things like clocks are definitely a theme in this game, though it never tries to present it as a key element of the world's shape. I don't think it's very noticeable either, and if you do notice it, it doesn't have the impact of something like navigating a giant humanoid body. There is a pretty neat boat segment where the player explores island to island Wind Waker style. That's something. Like I said at the start, this is all nitpicking stuff. I kinda hate the way I'm talking about this, though the fact I need to get into all these nitty-gritty details I think represents my problem here. If I talk about it at a higher level, it's hard to define the differences. You get a lot of systems that only differentiate themselves when you explain them bit by bit. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 tweaks the nuts and bolts of how things work, but does not introduce any new way to engage with it. Some might think I'm expecting too much out of what is essentially commonplace for sequels. Still, games like Xenoblade Chronicles X and Xenoblade Chronicles 2 set themselves apart in at least one way or another. For X, it's the world structure. For 2, it's the combat design. 3, I don't know. You can attack in water, though I'm a big believer that Monolith Soft does their best work when building from scratch, rather than simply layering on top of systems they've worked on before. When they move laterally, it opens room for situations like this where they don't tweak enough to make it stand out, or in some cases, make changes for the worse. Thankfully, in Xenoblade Chronicles 3, most of these systems are still good, but I struggle to find ways to really praise it beyond saying they fine-tuned the experience more than the last. New franchises are the best answer here for these issues, but I think we all know the Xenoblade Chronicles series is not going away anytime soon. Some people like to point me to this thing that looks like a new property, however, it's been 4 years since they talked about it. I'm not holding my breath until they show an actual trailer. Though if Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is the start of a solidification of this franchise's elements, I'm at the point in my life where I know I can move on. That's not to say I won't be sad, they are my favorite developer. But I would love to hear your thoughts. What other people like or dislike about games can really help me appreciate titles even if they don't meet my expectations. Ideally, someone like me can keep finding something to love about their games in the future even as their team, priorities, and fanbase changes. And I'm not super doom and gloom about it either. Even without a new series, they have proven in the past that they can succeed in differentiating releases within one franchise. Past Xenoblade games have always done something for me, even if some haven't met my standard of what a top-tier Monolith Soft title can be. And for all of you Hot Take fans out there, I think Xenosaga Episode 2 also proves that. What a cool battle system you get only like 15 hours to figure out and enjoy. Is this something that will bite Monolith Soft in the butt? I highly doubt it. Xenoblade Chronicles has the backing of critics, sales, fans, and Nintendo to continue to drive this franchise forward. The opinion of an old crusty Baten Kaitos fan probably doesn't matter that much. I've got a Disaster Day of Crisis poster. Nobody cares about me. I know my thoughts probably don't line up with many Xenoblade fans. Still, if you enjoyed this video or at least appreciate my point of view, I'd be thankful if you liked and shared it. I've been talking about Monolith Soft on the internet for a long time, hence the kind of baggage this video has in some ways. If you want to hear more, check out my playlist that includes all my Monolith Soft videos, including my Xenoblade reviews and some videos about their other games. Also, if you're into general Nintendo Switch stuff, check out my review of Buddy Mission Bond, an awesome Ace Attorney-like title published by Nintendo that features a high quality and over-the-top presentation.